Titans, welcome back to episode 61 of Titans of Today. We have Ted Bililies. He is the managing director and partner with AlixPartners and also the global co-leader of their Transformative Leadership practice. He is one of the most respected minds in leadership and human capital strategy in private equity with a PhD in clinical psychology. He has coached CEOs of multi-billion-dollar enterprises, advised global PE firms, and helped organizations thrive through seismic disruption, which is definitely how you could define the period we're going through right now. He's, on top of that, the architect of the firm's 10th annual private equity leadership survey and a sought-after voice on AI transformation and what truly makes a great leader. So we're going to dig into all that today. Ted, welcome to Titans of Today.
Thanks, Jacob. It's a real honor to be here with you.
Pleasure to have you. So in the golden age of AI, Ted, what separates companies that scale from those that stall? It's not just code. It's also culture, as we're going to talk about today. So in this episode, we seek to understand and decode with you why the true edge in private equity isn't just tech. It's also the emotional intelligence and the team and the culture that drives product innovation, new product lines, or better customer service, really just the broad range of business that AI is improving. Dr. Ted, being that you're a world-renowned leadership psychologist and advisor to PE Titans, what is really, if you were to distill it into a few core values or principles, what separates teams that are succeeding in today's seismic disruption?
Wow, that's a big question, and it's a fascinating and really exciting question. It's one I get very passionate about, Jacob. Let me try to maybe take a step back and set the scene just a little bit in terms of where we are, particularly with an emphasis on tech and private funded companies, but also let me talk a little bit about the workforce and how that's changing as well. So we've never lived through as disruptive a time as we're living through right now. It's become now cliche, right? We see it all the time, disruption, but by any measure you want to make, it's very much the world that we're living in. And so leaders and leadership has never really had such an unpredictable context to lead through. At the same time, we've got these demographic shifts where we've got 4 generations working in the workforce. By the time we hit 2030, which is 5 short years from now, we're going to have 5 generations in the workforce. Gen Z, which is around 20% of the workforce now, trending to 25, is going to be knocking on 50% of the workforce. Leading Gen Z, motivating Gen Z, recruiting, attracting, developing, and retaining Gen Z is a topic and a focus and a priority all its own. And hopefully we'll have time in this broadcast to talk a little bit about how leaders, particularly senior leaders, can relate to younger workers. Because the number of workers isn't necessarily going up, though this demographic shift is happening. We all know what's happening in the West and in Western Europe about older populations. So things are really changing, and they're changing very rapidly, and we haven't even mentioned AI yet. So I think what's happening here, if I were to summarize, Jacob, is that leadership itself is being disrupted. The old playbook of leadership you can throw out the door. The top-down leader, the guy or gal who barks out orders, it's like a funny meme from the 50s. It doesn't exist anymore. We have now organizations that are designed differently so that there's a lot more communication and a lot more collaboration. We have a generation kind of moving into the driver's seat that demands more from its leaders and expects more. And then, of course, we've got technology. And you mentioned one of my favorite words, which is culture. And I like to say a lot that leadership and culture are 2 sides of the same coin. Leaders determine culture, but culture also selects and empowers or not leaders. And so culture is becoming increasingly vital in creating value in companies today. I hope that wasn't too much, but in all fairness, Jacob, you gave me a really huge question.
I did. It's a good place to start. That way we can unpack and go from there. One of the key topics that comes up in my mind on this is if you're seeing Meta's poaching and very aggressive acquisition of new talent for their superintelligence AI practice. First it was with the Scale AI $14 billion investment valued at $29 billion. There was also the poaching from OpenAI and other firms. How do you look at something like that? Sam Altman said, missionaries will beat mercenaries. But maybe, is it that simple, or is there more there? And it really just underpins the greatest truth that you're talking about, that talent is where the value is being created, and leadership has to acknowledge that and adjust accordingly.
Look, there will always be people that walk across the street for more money. That's human nature. Human nature hasn't changed in about 200,000 years. So, that will still happen. However, and this is a really big however, we've been seeing now for at least 10 years. And you see this if you're interviewing and recruiting, particularly tech executives, if you're involved in most areas of the value creation chain of HR, that people are asking almost immediately, what's your culture here? What's the purpose of this organization? What good do you do in the world? And I've personally interacted with dozens of executives that basically say, now you can take this with a grain of salt, I'm not going to go across the street for 30% more because I believe in the mission of this organization. So to have an organization without a mission and without guiding principles, I'd say you're probably dead in the blocks. What you'll get mercenaries, but the question then is, is that what you want? A company full of mercenaries? I think this is one of the great features of Gen Z, quite frankly, is that they want to work for organizations that have a purpose. They want to know how their work connects to that purpose, and they want to know that their CEO and their leadership of that organization cares that they care about that purpose. And we're seeing this trend over and over again. In fact, a lot of the CEOs that I coach, we'll call them 50 years old, give or take, right? And they're many times just very frustrated with, quote, these kids. And it's, look, wake up and smell the coffee, pal, because these kids, first of all, are going to become 50% of the workforce. And it's really not their fault. It's their virtue. It's their strength. And as soon as you wake up and understand that, then you can adjust your leadership style and your leadership development to be able to have an impact on them.
Definitely. So again, on the topic of disruption there's also the new ways of working that many are adapting to that were accelerated, of course, by COVID and other sort of things. What this really brings up, though, what you're saying about these CEOs and leaders is maybe a mindset they have is that I've been doing this for so long and I've had success with it. Why do I need to change and adapt because of these new people who are working for me, who are now representing a growing portion of the workforce? How do you go about shifting that mindset? Is there an approach from clinical psychology that helps you with that, or is it maybe a more practical exercise?
That's a great question, Jacob. And not to bore your audience, but I'll take 60 seconds to remind people what they might already know, or maybe they don't, and that is medical education in the United States it took decades to change this notion that once you're a resident, you're awake for 72 hours. You have to do your 3-night, 3-day shift. Doesn't matter that the mortality rate is through the roof, right? Patients are dying, and we're keeping doctors in training up 3 days in a row. And you know why they were kept up for 72 hours? Because I had to go through it, so you're going to have to go through it. So this nature, we're back to human nature again, Jacob, where, look, 50-year-old CEO says, when I was 26, I didn't say anything. I didn't ask for a raise. I knew that I had to do my 5 years or my 8 years or my 10 years. Why should they get something different? And this notion that I had to do it, so you have to do it. And when the coin drops and when I'm able to get that CEO to say, look, your argument makes, some kind of logical sense, right? That was your experience, and you think that your experience should now translate to this generation. Say, do you have kids? Yeah, I got 2. Okay, what are their ages? One is 21 and one's 25. What would they say to you if they were working for you? And then they start to laugh, right? And it's this notion of they're not lazy. They're not overly idealistic. They're interested in the purpose and the mission of the organization. They also want to stay over their life and their career. They care about their health. They went through COVID, either as teenagers or as in their young 20s. They're concerned about health, including mental health. The sooner you can take them seriously, the sooner you can win the war on recruitment. And we see lots of headlines now, Jacob, about layoffs, and the pendulum is swinging back, giving some companies leverage over employees, and all of that's true. But the unemployment rate is still 4%. And for tech jobs, it's wildly competitive. So at the end of the day, the CEO needs to attract and retain the very, very best people. I would also say, you said, what are the tricks that you can use too? Reverse mentoring is really powerful. It's very powerful in a number of ways. For the CEO to get somebody who's 25 or 30 and say, teach me this technology, teach me this platform, teach me what you do, really humbles that CEO and really puts him or her in the position of learner. And it also shows respect and elevates a younger person. 20 years ago, could you ever imagine a CEO saying to a new hire, I need you to mentor me? It would be a cruel joke. But now it's actually in Silicon Valley and other places, it's actually really happening, and it has a very powerful and positive effect. I will also say there's an influencer on TikTok that I absolutely love, Laura Whaley. She has 6 million followers, and her TikToks are all about teaching people in their 20s how to talk to people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. Because this generation learned to swipe before they learned to wipe. They are really they don't always phrase things or say things in the way that older people can understand. And what I love about Laura is she says, look, I understand what you need. Phrase it in this way, say it in this way, you'll get a better reaction. So we're really talking about trying to bridge the generational divide. Each side has to do something, each side has to make some concessions, but it's absolutely vital if the next generation is going to have the careers that they want and the older generation is going to be able to create the value that they want in their companies.
Just how vital is it? What is it going to look like? We hear about AI. This was a McKinsey study back in early 2020 about AI and how laggards versus leaders would fare over the next 20 years. How is it from the culture perspective? What does that graph look like? Because for the leaders in AI, I cannot remember, but it was a significant, it was almost an order of magnitude or more increase in the valuation of those companies versus the laggards. What would it look like from a culture perspective if they did that same survey?
I think that obviously AI is going to be a revolution, at least on par with the internet, if not more. People are going to be watching that very carefully, but I think that it makes the human element all the more important. I think you need a human in the loop, whether it's on an individual technology or whether it's whatever it is, whether it's part of a team. People at the end of the day are not going to stay in organizations that just have the best technology but have a crummy culture, or where they're not being paid attention to, or nobody can tell them what their career path is going to be. I don't need to know the exact job I'm going to have in 3 years, but I sure would like to know what I'm being considered for a year or 18 months down the road. And if you, my manager, don't have a clue what I'm going to be considered for, maybe I should go somewhere where there's somebody who cares. So I don't, it's not either or, it's and. It's technology and human capital. It's technology and human care. It's not treating people like profit centers. It's treating people like people. And that's where you get the most out of the equation and out of the technology.
And talk about the origins and impact of the PE leadership survey that you did and some of the findings there and how that correlates with what we're discussing.
Yeah. So I've worked with private equity investors for over 30 years. And what does that mean? It means that you're very familiar with the private equity model, that there's a collection of capital from a variety of sources, and private equity, not bound by a lot of the constrictions of public companies, can then go ahead and improve the companies that it buys. There's been immense change. We could spend the entire hour talking about how private equity has changed over the last few decades, but it used to be that you could buy a company conduct some financial re-engineering on it, improve its value, flip it, sell it. You never even had to look at the people. It was just like, it was, in the words of a mercenary, it was a beautiful thing. Those days are long gone. They're long gone. There are fewer and fewer $400 to $600 million companies available. There are fewer companies to buy. Many companies have been bought and sold already by private equity. Despite the wonderful world of technology, it doesn't create the abundance of companies. Private equity investors have had to really look at people. Who are their CEOs? Who are their management teams? Who are really curating the human capital processes in their investments, and how do they create value? So 10 years ago, I said, I really want to look at these two constituencies, the people that invest and own the companies and the people who run the companies. And so we've been doing thorough surveys of both of those parties for 10 years, and we've got a decade of really valuable data. Because as you might imagine, you're a private equity investor on the board of this technology company. You're not happy with this and that they're doing, but you're happy with these other things. Meanwhile, your management team is saying, oh man, Jacob's coming back again this week. What is he? He demanded how many financial reports this week? I got a business to run. I can't just keep sending him reports. So that's the nature. It's a unique, one-of-a-kind survey. We get a decade of data, and I could talk ad nauseum about what we found. A couple of some of the most interesting findings is that investors, the boards of these private equity-backed companies, are oftentimes very unsatisfied with the leadership that they have. Meanwhile, the CEOs of the companies that they're running are quite proud of the leaders that they have. They're in there every day. They're in the trenches every day, slugging it out, making money, running their companies, doing everything you got to do to run a company. Meanwhile, these MBAs and finance guys swoop in every once in a while and say, you need to do better, you need to do better. So there's an opportunity for animosity. There's also an opportunity for understanding and collaboration. And I like to think that's some of the work that we've been able to do, is to really say, look, you guys are on the same team. It doesn't have to be adversarial. And I think that's a beautiful thing. When private investors and a management team are on this, really feel like they're on the same team, that's capitalism at its best. That's our model. That's our financial model at its absolute best. But it isn't automatic, doesn't automatically occur, right? It's got to be curated. Sometimes it's got to be very deliberate, and that's what some of the work is that my team and I do.
So, what's the process to curate that relationship and transform a company to one that's on the right track and has the opportunity to thrive?
It's really, I think the first step is really getting buy-in on the strategic plan, and that's easier said than done. So as you could imagine, if you're an investor, you want to double, triple, etc., you want to see those numbers go up and to the right. If you're running a company, you see all of the obstacles that can slow that down. So the first step is making sure that the value creation plan or investment thesis, they go by the different terms, but they're the same thing, that those value creation plans for the company and the investors that there's no daylight between those two parties, that they both really sign on to and believe in the payoff that each of them are going to receive. Then you need a human capital strategy that mimics and parallels that business strategy. And this is where many firms fall down, because they just think if they set the numbers and they set the targets and work like hell, everything's going to work out. And what we're really finding in the age of AI and with the sophisticated technology that we have is that people are not fungible. You just can't get a guy or gal who works hard and, oh, they went to a good school, so they must be smart. You just can't switch people around that. You really need to look at the person. What does the role require? Not just what it requires today. What's it going to require in a year or two? And is this the right person who's going to be able to grow? And oh, by the way, who wants to grow to create the value down the road? I was on a call yesterday with a major private equity investor who had exactly this issue. They bought a collision company, a place that works with automotives, and their firm's doing great. Firm's doing wonderful. They're very happy that they bought it. And not only that, the senior team, A plus, really good people on the team. What they're concerned about is the alignment of the team behind the strategy. and what it's going to be like a year or two from now after they've made 6 or 8 acquisitions, after they've grown considerably. Is this the right team of leaders for really 18 months from now, which is not a very long period of time? So to answer your question, how do you do it? You profile and understand those exact roles, how they actually create value. You give people an abundance of actionable feedback on their strengths and their weaknesses, on their strengths and their risks. You really encourage them to be development oriented. You make sure the CEO is development oriented. And you also, in the board and the investors, you cultivate an appreciation for the need that none of us are completely there. We're all works in progress. We all can get better. And to have patience and focus with that management team, not blind trust. No one's talking about blind trust, but to bring a sense of patience and support to the management team, to give them inspiration and to give them guidance. And when that works, when that's all working together, it's a value creation engine.
So for someone who's in that CEO seat, one piece that you mentioned there is that essentially it's very easy if you're creating a strategy to conflate your strategy and your numbers with leadership. And they're two distinct things. You have the strategy and the numbers, then you have the actual leadership practices that CEO is going to be taking part in on a regular basis, the core habits that will formulate and really drive the team. What are those core habits for a CEO in that type of position?
That's a great question. And again, it gets back to where we started, where leadership itself is being disrupted, right? So there, once upon a time, we talked a lot about being decisive and being strategic and communicating clearly. And it's not so much that the time-honored elements of leadership have changed. They've just been added to, right? So now we talk about agility and flexibility and emotional intelligence. We particularly post-COVID, we talk about the CEO, and let me use the term CEO as for any senior leader in an organization that's running a group or running a unit. We talk about emotional intelligence as being able to understand the perspective of the people that you're leading. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to be where they are, but you have to take the time to be able to appreciate what it is that they need and what they're looking for. CNBC just came out the other day with a rating of the 10 companies with the most unfavorable ratings by Gen Z. And so it's not going to be a great surprise. You have Tesla, you have Meta, you have Boeing, you have McKinsey. It's a new one on the list. Why are these companies unfavorably rated? Because their ethics, their practice, their purpose and their practice and their values and their ethics have become compromised. They've come in question. So the leader, first and foremost, has to be an ethical paragon. If you look at Glassdoor.com, those CEOs are rated all the time. And that kind of transparency is very powerful. People care who's in the top spot. And again, getting back to an earlier question of yours, people love to get paid, but they love to work for an ethical company. And they will walk across the street for the same or a little less or a little more if they feel like they're gonna get that, particularly members of Gen Z.
So if you were assembling now, to go a step further, the team around an objective or a strategy, how do you identify the right traits that will contribute to a positive and successful culture, and not just somebody wants to come in and try to work like hell and not really collaborate with others? How do you go about differentiating? Because when we talk about, and we hear much about A players, B players, and things like that, sometimes those A players, as we traditionally might know them, may not jive very well with this culture-driven approach that you're talking about, or they can be potentially readjusted or built in a more collaborative way. So how would you go about really identifying who's going to succeed in your team for your turnaround or your company?
I just want to pause for a minute on your question, because it is really a profound one, and it might be I think it should be of interest to people listening to this podcast. I can't tell you the number of times that A players, particularly sales players, people with a sales track record of bringing in millions and millions of dollars. So you think they're literally worth their weight in gold, right? And they are exited from the organization. Why? They have really sharp elbows. They don't treat people well. Their ethics are overall, generally speaking, fine. They're not embezzling money. However, they're treating the EAs like crap. They're competing with their colleagues to the extent of really cutting off opportunities for them. It's a really important question. So your question then is, how do you identify those people? How do you assemble the right team of leaders? And this is where we've seen a dramatic rise in psychological assessment over the last 25 years. Using psychological assessment for the selection of executives actually started in the late 40s, if you can believe that. It was an outgrowth of World War II and a lot of the testing that was done. But it's become very refined, and there are three key elements that can help you select the right person and build the right team. One is to do a really detailed historical walkthrough interview of the person's career, really understanding. This is done over like a 3 to 4 hour period, really understanding the highs and lows, what they're proudest of, what some of their failures have been, when they've led a team, what hasn't gone well. So really getting a sense of that person's history, starting way back in elementary school. Number two is to do really robust reference checks. Not one or two reference checks, not 3 or 4 reference checks, not, yeah, Jacob worked here from these dates to these dates, but really in-depth forensic reference checks of people that Jacob worked with day in and day out. And the third leg of the stool is psychological testing. And we have some amazing tests that have been normed on executives around the world. They're fair and unbiased. They're pro-diversity, if you will, in the sense that they're not language biased in any way, but most importantly, they're normed on global executives. And where you see people fall relative to the norm in terms of delegation, in terms of collaboration, communication, can be very powerful. In summary, the answer to your question is you due diligence the hell out of each person in a kind way, in a respectful way, because after all, at the end of the day, if the person isn't right for the job, they're not going to be happy in that job. Let them go find a job and the culture where they're really going to thrive. But you're really wanting to understand the person in depth and then match that person to the culture that's being built. And that's a very deliberate and to some extent time-consuming process, but it's a really valuable process with a huge payoff. Because when it doesn't happen, you get churn and you get culture destruction and you get a lot of bad things for shareholders.
Right. And the stability is tantamount. Just like, to take a parallel example, Warren Buffett, rule number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, don't forget rule number 1. You can see that in talent and culture as well, because if you have those people who are dragging the team down, you're going to take somebody who's extremely excited and aligned with the vision and the purpose and the mission, and they're working with that A player who's a bit toxic, and it throws them off, and all of a sudden that affects the next person, versus having the right assembly of people together that will work harmoniously towards that objective.
Before you jump in with your next question, Jacob, I got some stats for your audience, and that is that even though at AlixPartners we have this AlixPartners Private Equity Leadership Survey, our other big flagship research arm is the AlixPartners Disruption Index, and we're going on our 7th year with that. And this is a survey of 3,300 executives around the globe. So here's 5 stats that I wanted to share with you and your audience. Our latest ADI, AlixPartners Disruption Index, executives around the globe said 25% are investing in leadership development, 60% are offering their people more networking and professional development opportunities, 33% are investing in training for growth, 50% of CEOs are worried about falling behind in their own skills, and 30% of executives are seeking to improve their coaching and mentoring skills. So what's the picture here? The picture is that the organization that doesn't take people and people development seriously is going to suffer from really a lack of talent. And this goes to the CEOs themselves and to the topic of reverse mentoring and the topic of, am I the CEO of this company? Am I current? Am I keeping up? I don't have to write the code, but do I understand the impact that AI is going to have on my company's future? So the business world is shifting very radically towards getting better. What is the best way to do that? What is the best way to have an aligned team? What is the best way to have a high performance team? What is the best way to be a performer? So to support your question, that's where we see the business world going globally.
Great. So to ask that two-part question actually is the first, how have you seen individuals who were potentially on the brink that took part in these practices, the networking, the leadership development, self-development, everything like that, culture development, that went from being on the brink to being a highly productive and successful and contributing beyond just the numbers to that company's culture? Do you have an example like that?
Yeah, no, there's been some very moving examples of both, of people having really life-changing moments. There's one senior salesperson that I worked with a few months ago who was about as cynical about the younger generation and about other people's needs in general. He was such an outstanding individual contributor and such an outstanding individual performer, but he was such a jerk towards other people that when I did a 360 evaluation, I talked with a number of people in his world, and I sanitized it and I anonymized it, but I didn't mince words. When I told him exactly what people thought of him, he broke down. He really broke down. I said, ultimately, is this the legacy you want to leave? And he wasn't old. He was like 39 or something like that. I said, but is this what you want to look back on your career and be remembered for? And he said, of course not. And he said immediately, I'm a father. I've got a little daughter. I'm like, yeah, at some point it all comes together, right? It's like our personal lives and our professional lives. All when we say, yeah, that's not what I want to be known for. That's not the how that I want to be known for. And it isn't just about the what, it's about the how. And so he started repairing those relationships and worked really hard. Now, for every one of those examples, unfortunately, there's also another example where it just isn't the time in the person's life to be able to assimilate that kind of feedback, and they split, they go, they leave, they just say, screw you, I'll find an environment where it's eat what you kill, I'll do it, I'll kill it, I'll do it, and good luck. That's not where companies of the future are going. I'll give you one other example that I know your audience is very well familiar with, which is Satya Nadella at Microsoft has embraced the work of the psychologist Carol Dweck, growth mindset, Google it, and he's reinvented Microsoft really as a growth mindset culture where proper failure, risk managed failure is encouraged. What did you learn by that? Managers are trained to create a growth mindset in people, and people are attracted and stimulated and are retained there largely because of the culture that he has created using that growth mindset. So it's certainly possible. It's certainly possible to do that, and I would say it's essential that more companies do that.
And that leads perfectly into the second part of the question, which is teams that have been on the brink that you've seen, that initially the board members and the acquirers, the private equity group said, we need to get rid of these people, we need to cut 30%. And through the right development, do you have any examples like that, where through the right development, the team was able to, absent maybe taking out a few people who were not the right fit, really turn around and create a transformational growth mindset culture?
Yeah, and it really starts, it actually doesn't start with the people on the team. It starts with the roles. And by that, and this is something I talk about with clients every day, and sometimes it takes a while for the coin to drop. You occupy a role right now, Jacob. There's somebody at Titans of Today that runs the show, right? You happen to be in the seat, and I'm sure you created the seat. But the fact of the matter is, when I look at you, I can see that there's a role. And you might just say, hey, I'm taking a year off, Ted. I want you to take my role. Again, it's a role. What we do is we define those roles on an executive leadership team. Obviously, we got to have the CEO and the board's complete buy-in on that. But we design those roles first. What are the deliverables? And that's the what. And what are the competencies, the leadership qualities and traits and characteristics and abilities that they have to deliver the what? So getting back to the earlier point of you might be the world's best salesperson, but if you're offending people every day and legal and HR is down your throat every day, you're not really helping the company. So you start with the role, and then of course, then you assess the people. You use assessment tools. You use 360-degree feedback. You let each person own their report and make one pledge to the team. This is my feedback. This is what I'm going to be working on. I want all of you to give me feedback on this. It might be greater openness, greater transparency, greater collaboration. It may be that I interrupt too much and people are avoiding me because they just can't stand my communication style. I've got a coach. I'm going to be working on that. When people pledge to one another, though, when they're vulnerable enough to pledge to one another and then work on that, you really see the bonds forming really between them. And then, of course, it's all about pursuing the goal, and we get back to the leadership of the CEO. So you've got to be very deliberate and thoughtful and use the right kind of tools to assemble the right people.
And we're very in sync here because initially I was going to ask this question I'm going to ask now and then it's in perfect harmony. You tied right back into the assessments, because when you were mentioning on how important the assessments are and really that multi-step process, what are the assessments that you are doing? Is it Myers-Briggs? You mentioned openness and other aspects of that. And are there there's definitely literature on how certain personality types work together. Do you buy into all that? And is there a key structure that for example, your CEO has to be maybe these 4 of the 16 of the Myers-Briggs, or is it not that serious? And how do you really correlate some of those results to who should be in the right seats?
Yeah. In fact, I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago for Hogan assessments because we're a big user of Hogan tools. So I would say you mentioned Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs is a fine social style inventory that I would use if I was doing an offsite with a management team. However, tools that you're actually making a hiring decision, basing your hiring decision on tools, I would not use the Myers-Briggs. I would use the Hogan suite. I would use any of the assessment tools that are based on the big 5 factor of personality, and people can Google that. And I would want a measure of cognitive flexibility and emotional intelligence. So we're measuring emotional intelligence, we're measuring cognitive flexibility, we're measuring personality. The Hogan suite helps us, but we're also using a number of other instruments as well, and led by, as I said before, that long, rigorous interview where we really get behind the eyeballs of the candidate in a very friendly way, but just saying, I'm really curious. I really want to understand. How did you get to be the person you are now? Tell me some stories. I want to hear some stories about those crucible moments that really formed you as a person. And people love talking about their favorite subject. So the time goes by very quickly.
So is there a golden ratio for a great CEO in the situations that you've had experience in that Hogan assessment and some of those sliders?
I find that there's been debates in the literature, introverts versus extroverts. To successful CEOs, do they have to be extroverts? And this is why I shy away from anything formulaic or programmatic. I think anybody can be a great leader, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert or a thinker or a sensor, whatever some of those categories might be. I think what unites, particularly now in this age of disruption, is a man or woman who is actually very comfortable, almost strangely comfortable, sitting in a position of responsibility amidst disruption. Someone who's comfortable running to the fire, who actually gets a little bit twitchy if things are too calm and too slow, as opposed to our traditional notion of the CEO or leader who basically, I'm on vacation, don't bother me now. There are, and I've worked with some incredible young CEOs who are just fired up by change. They're change-philic. They're fired up by it. And it's like, what are we going to do today differently? Or this surprise thing happened, or tariffs happened. Okay, let's not cry about it. What are we going to do about it? The individual over-indexing on flexibility, on creativity, on emotional intelligence, and a comfort and even a preference for a very fast-paced, fast-moving environment. Those are some of the qualities that we absolutely look to. Obviously, superb interpersonal skills, because nobody's going to do this alone. You're going to do this as part of a team, no matter what your title happens to say. That's just a given. And so again, it's like some of the coaching work that I see are men and women who are a little bit older, who are still rooted somewhat in that old style of thinking, and really needing to unpot them and replant them in a whole different world that we're in now.
Talk about your passion projects, the high ROI passion projects that leaders can institute within their organization to spur innovation.
I think that if a CEO is not meeting at least a couple of times a week with some of his or her high potential younger workers, whether that's formal reverse mentoring or whether that's a reverse mentoring lunch, right? It's like, come on, bring me your ideas. I don't know what you guys know. I'm really curious to know what you folks know. And then goes off and talks about that at the town hall or talks about that with clients. That jazzes people up. That does many things in one fell swoop. It allows people to feel valued. It gives them visibility. It helps the CEO learn, because as I just read to you with our ADI, 50% of CEOs think they're falling behind or worry that they're falling behind. By the way, there's a very high number of CEOs that think they're going to lose their jobs or worry about losing their jobs for that very reason. So the passion project is for the senior execs to not just spend more time with younger workers, but learn what they learn, promote them, talk about what you're learning from them. And I think this notion of reverse mentoring and exchange of information is a huge accelerator of talent retention and talent development and ultimately value creation in almost any kind of company, particularly a technology company.
And what would a culture audit look like for a CEO or a founder, or even a board private equity firm that's going to be acquiring a company? What does a culture audit look like on the ground?
Yeah, we do those quite a bit. You're looking at finding representatives from every part of the organization. Sometimes we'll start with an ONA, an organization network analysis, which is really fascinating. You look at organizations' emails and patterns of communication, and suddenly you see that this person, Mary, over here, that's an administrator, everybody's connected to her. Nobody makes a move in the organization without talking to Mary, and you think, now, wait a minute. Let's see. Today I was going to talk to the CEO and the COO and the chief revenue officer. I guess I need to talk to Mary. And you look at the organization, you say, where are these nodes? Where are people really connecting with each other? And so you articulate who those people are. Generally, it's 25 or 30. And then you do an in-depth interview with those people around cultural processes, how people are valued, how people are treated, core values of the organization, core principles. You feed that back to the executive team. You also give the executive team an assignment. They've got to report out on this survey to the wider organization because the organization wants to hear from them. And then you help them chart a path forward in terms of addressing some of those issues.
We talked pretty well in depth about the techniques and tactics that you've mentioned throughout the podcast now. What about if we do add AI into this mix now? How helpful is AI in doing some of these things, or where is AI's place in the organizations that you're working with?
AI's got a huge role to play and is playing really in both the democratization of information, but also in fairness in hiring, right? So it can look at resumes. It can blind resumes. And this movement, which started a few years ago, of moving from resumes to skills, really focusing on the skills of a job and hiring for skills, not hiring for where you went to school or where you grew up. So there's a great opportunity there. There's an opportunity in gamification. So I've just joined this company, and now I can actually on my phone figure out where I am on the onboarding process relative to where other people who joined the company at roughly the same time, where they are. And I can, so again, this is the generation that learned to swipe before it learned to wipe. So everything's going to be moved onto a phone or a device where people are able to manage their own development, manage their own integration and onboarding into an organization. AI has a huge role to play in that, in onboarding new executives and in the hiring new executives, and then really around resume screening and the hiring process. That's already doing that. It's already doing that now. And of course, it's replacing some jobs. It tends to be replacing some of the lower level jobs. And this is another reason why it's so important for companies to have the training and development available so people that are displaced can actually take on other work in the organization.
Do you have insight on how those AI algorithms work when it comes to analyzing resumes, and how somebody who's looking for a job, maybe a Gen Z, could tailor, or maybe it's a later stage executive, really anyone with a resume who's looking for a job, how could they tailor for those AI read resumes?
They should make sure to pay attention to the language that they're using, and making sure that their language is behavioral, so that it's specific, it's measurable, it's reflected in what you've actually done, it's detailed. Avoid the adjectives and really focus much more on verbs and on behaviors. I think that gets you much further in those engines than sticking with titles and roles and that kind of thing. Be very descriptive behaviorally in terms of what you've accomplished, and quantify whenever you can.
A question off of that: how do you look at resumes that are fully AI written? Do you have any insights on companies and how, because there are things that you can actually take a document and you can analyze if it was written by AI. And I've heard some voices and some opinions that they look down on those, that maybe someone shouldn't be fully writing their resume with AI. But in your experience, do you have any insights on how those are looked at?
Jacob, I just have anecdotal experience, and that is that the relatively few companies I've heard that have encountered that, they don't take kindly to it. They assume that AI is going to have an input into a person's resume. They would like to know that then that person went through the resume and tailored it and edited it, if you will, in a way that made it more personal and made it more descriptive. So that would be the advice I would give. I don't think it's a net positive.
If you were to design an AI technology for an operation, a software, with all your experience, what would it help leaders do? How would it be different from what's presently available, and how might it mitigate and assist with the transformation that's going to occur over the next 5 years with talent?
What a great question. So we're involved at AlixPartners. We're involved in large-scale transformation every day, all the time, across the world. Each transformation is not the same, but most transformation has predictable crises and predictable points. And if I had the ability to create using AI, I would want to be able to predict for individuals and teams what the next challenge is going to be. And in fact, that's what I think some folks are actually trying to do with the technology. And I think it's well worth it, because dealing with today's part of the transformation is one thing. Knowing what's coming down the road 6 months from now is hugely helpful if you can be able to accurately predict that, and getting the staffing and getting the training and getting the skills all lined up that you're going to need in the fall for that next phase of the transformation.
A proactive approach versus solely reactive in the transformations.
Yeah.
So why will the next unicorns win through blended leadership models, AI and human?
Yeah, why will they win as opposed to just being AI focused? I'm going to modify your question a little bit. Because humans are not going away, not by a long shot. And it's really a very foolish founder or entrepreneur that thinks that people are really all that fungible. Private equity completely buys into the notion that is not true. People are still very important. And we haven't really talked about the ways in which private equity has both hired operating partners on their side that have human capital backgrounds to really help their portfolio companies, and how the portfolio companies are really improving the quality of their HR talent in the companies themselves. So we're getting bona fide CHROs in the portfolios, and we're getting sometimes former CHROs, but really sophisticated executives as human capital operating partners on the investment side, because this issue of human capital in the value creation equation couldn't be more important. So if somebody wants to just fly in the face of that and say, no, AI is going to get me everything that I need, I don't need to think about people, culture, talent, or teams, good luck, because it isn't going to, I haven't quite seen that example yet. I'm not saying that it couldn't happen, but for the vast number of companies and the companies that need to change their operating models now because of AI, that's a one massive change management exercise, and you got to bring people along on a change management exercise. You can't dictate to them, and you can't just expect that they're going to pick it up. That's a change management exercise that isn't going to go away.
So now, Ted, as you're looking into the next 5 years and beyond that when it comes to technology, private equity, what is the final statement that you have for our listeners and action that they can take right after listening to this podcast that can help them to be more aligned with the right path that will take them to the success thereafter?
I would say something like, it all starts with you. If you haven't had a really thorough inventory of your leadership strengths and weaknesses, get that done. Either get a coach or go to your HR person and ask, what does the company offer around a 360 feedback tool? Make sure it's a good one, because there's some bad ones out there. Talk to a mentor, get a mentor, talk to a mentor, force those honest conversations where people are not just going to tell you how great you are, but they're going to tell you what you really need to change to get to the next level. And it all starts with you. And I would say make sure that you do that inventory and do it really well.
Yeah, one of the statements that you made about the 39-year-old sales leader who did undergo a very positive transformation, I actually had somebody share a same technique or practice was used where they essentially had a survey of all the team members and said, how do you enjoy working with this person? What are your comments for this person? And he said back then when they did it with him, they didn't anonymize it. So he knew exactly what everybody was saying. And he said he went home and cried. He's a leader, thought of himself as a very successful leader, but when he really heard what people were thinking about his leadership style, he said he went home and cried, and that he completely changed his course after that. And I second what you're saying there about getting that honest and clear feedback. So is there a way that people can work with you on executing those things and getting those things done, and where can they find you?
Oh, absolutely. Just shoot me an email at AlixPartners.com. I'm sure we can give them my contact information. I'd be more than happy to help. And you can also reach out on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Ted, thank you for being on Titans of Today, episode 61. We'd love to have you back. We actually did get the in-person studio set up now, potentially come back sometime in the future.
Would love to, Jacob. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Likewise. Cheers.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up Today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.